Hello and welcome. Today we'll be world building Ta-Nagasei. And I believe, and I could be mistaken, but I believe we're on part 7. Last time we looked at the magical, industrial, science fantasy element. It's been a while since I made one of these, so I haven't actually checked my notes. Um, when I say my notes, I mean the notes that I take after doing one of these videos to catch me up on what was previously established. But this time, I want to talk about ships. And I'm just going to brainstorm with you guys, and I hope it's going to be a lot of fun. So, one of the things that we need to think about is what style of ship would our two continents, more than two continents, develop? And there are several ways we could go about doing this. But I do want the seas to be quite rough, and I don't want them meeting one another, shall we say, until much later on. And so for centuries after the continent has been divided and the plate tectonics have been, shall we say, forced into existence, the seas have been churning and they've been rough. And we need a reason for that. Now, it could be that the currents of the world are quite strong. It could also be that there are a lot of rocky shoals and that it is very, very hard to navigate. And of course, we could put sea monsters in too. That's always fun. But let's look at the actual waters themselves. If we have shall we say a supermoon? I see a lot of, and I'm guilty of this in my own writing, a lot of double moon systems or two moons, sometimes three. But often I see a lot of stories featuring two moons, and that's kind of almost a mark that you're not on planet Earth. But let's shy away from that one because, like I said, I'm guilty of it in my own writing, and I want this to be a little different. So let's put in a single supermoon, and what we can do is we can have it on a elliptical orbit. So rather than it being a circle, it will be a loop, which means that at times it will be closer, at times it will be further away. Now, why do we want to do this? Because we want to make the sea unpredictable. And when a supermoon is close to the world and it is a full tide, it will be much more powerful than when the moon is on the far side. And so this is going to make sea travel very difficult. I'm not entirely sure what it would do to the sea life. It would probably make it difficult for them as well. So most of the sea life, I think, will have to exist in the depths, in the dark, in the deep. And we can put in a whole bunch of volcanic vents, and these will release nutrients and heat into the water. And so this will have a profound impact on the ecology down there. But the other thing about having a rather large-sized supermoon is it's going to create more disruption. And I think that it may cause more volcanic activity. I'm not entirely sure if that's scientific, but that's what we're going to go with. That there will be an impact because it's not just the moon that's being affected by the planet. It's the planet being affected by the moon. And so what we can do is we can make our world of Ta-Nagasei more like a binary planetary system. And rather than have it be equal worlds, they can be unequal And so, in a way, our dual planetary system, our binary planetary system, will look more like Pluto. And just to make it a little more fun, why don't we add in some asteroid moons? Put in about five asteroid moons. I like asteroid moons. They're quite fun. And I also like having moons which have their own moons. And there are many different terms for that. I prefer the term moonlet. And that's just personal preference. So what we will do is we will have a binary planetary system with one large supermoon, and we'll call it a moon because it is inferior to the superior planet in terms of mass. But what we can do is we can fill it, and we can fill it like Mercury is filled. So it's quite a dense planet. We can put iron in it and give it an iron core, and so it will generate its own magnetosphere. And so when the moon comes into close proximity with the mother planet or sister planet, there will be auroras in the sky. Not from merely the primary planet, the mother planet's own magnetosphere, but of the clashing of the moon's magnetosphere. And we'll also have 5 asteroid moons, which are much smaller, and they just orbit around the mother planet, and they don't do a whole lot. But the moon will also have let's just make it 2 asteroid moonlets of its own. And so in all, we have 7 asteroid moons. And so this will severely alter our planet's oceans. We also need to decide how much ocean there is. And I think I read somewhere many years ago that it needs to be about 70% water on the surface. Otherwise, things don't work quite so well, and I don't exactly remember why, but I think it's something to do with the currents. And from what I recall, it's something to do with the cold currents and the hot currents. And these things will warm and cool the continents. And if you don't have that, then you're not going to get a varied band. I guess band is a good word for temperate, subtropical, tropical, and Arctic, or polar, if you prefer. And so when you mix that with mountains, when you mix it with the wind and with the jet stream, the ocean currents are vital. And it's also vital for rain, because the sun will heat the ocean and rain will form, and then it will move inland. And so without it, you're going to have a lot of desert. We don't want that, because I've already established that there's not a lot of desert. So we're going to have a very turbulent ocean. And that means that most of our ships, they can only sail either when the tide is very high or when it's low. Or perhaps not when the full moon is a supermoon and close to the world. The waxing and the waning, I should say, rather than a full moon. But for this, we're going to want coastal vessels, which means we're not going to want deep sea vessels. Now, maybe they could navigate, and the waves, which could easily exceed 80 feet high. Because on our world, the waves can reach 80 feet high. So imagine how high the towering waves would reach on a world where the moon is much bigger and pulls closer. And of course, the orbits would have to be, I don't know if synchronized is the right word, but they'd have to be stable enough that it doesn't disrupt. Otherwise, the moon and its world could crash into each other. So there'd have to be some kind of equilibrium. And of course, we would also have the axis tilts. So every so often there would be a wobble. And again, that would change things up. But coastal vessels, because within the deep, there are going to be sea monsters. And with those sea monsters, well, that would cause problems. So by and large, ocean travel is not advisable. And of course, we have all those shoals and those reefs. And with the waves rising up and down, that makes it even more perilous. And you've got underwater volcanoes, which means hotspots. So there's an awful lot of reasons why you wouldn't go on the ocean deep. But what about the coast and the coastal waters? Well, those would be dangerous too. But if you had charts and if you knew what you were doing, it would probably be faster to take a ship than it would be by foot. Because even with roads, even with carriages, it's faster to go by sea, providing you're not too weighed down, providing you have the right rigging and the right sails. And the thing about a ship or a boat is that you want to capitalize the amount for sails. And of course, you can have oars as well. So, with that said, we need to think about the design of our ships. And I think that it might be too dangerous just to have sails. Because if they were becalmed, then there would be no wind. And were the seas to rise and fall, then they could be dashed to pieces against the rocks. So I think that oars would be essential because you need to get yourself out of that. And if you need to pull in and you need to moor or you need to row out, throw down your anchor, weigh anchor, you'd have to reach a safe harbor. So I think that would be essential. But there are a couple of ways we could go about doing this. We could have the equivalent of tugboats. Why not? Maybe these tugboats are powered by magic. No reason not to be. Or by steam. So why would you have sail in an age of steam? Well, there are a couple of reasons for this. Number one, you have to put a lot of coal or wood or whatever it is you are burning in the boiler in order to power the ship. And while you're not powering the ship, it's weighty. So you need to have a compartment which houses fuel. But the wind is free. It doesn't cost you all that much. Now, yes, you have to keep the sails going. You have to maintain it. You have to slacken them or trim them. But it's essentially free. So why not use it? Which means that you can use less coal, less wood, less oil, less whatever it is you're burning. And this is a good thing. So why not have sails and a boiler? And of course, boilers are prone to breaking. Fickle things. Fickle things. Now remember, even though the sea acts as a shock absorber, which is why ships had so many cannon on, so many guns on compared to their land counterparts, it doesn't mean that the sea is stable. So you have to make your boiler stable. So we're going to give them sails. And we're also going to give them oars, just in case the boiler breaks. But with each addition we add, we're adding more weight. But let's just assume for a moment that there's been a terrible, terrible storm. Maybe your crew are safe, but you had to lighten the ship. That meant dumping your coal or your wood. Or maybe it was washed overboard, even though it was in the hull. Maybe you had to seal that section off because it got filled with water, bulkheads. So your sails have been shredded, your boiler has been either inaccessible or the fuel is gone. You've got very little. So you have oars. Now, yes, the oars could be broken, but hopefully by having one of these three, you've got enough redundancy that your ship can make it. Now, again, why would you want a ship? Because it's fast and because it can transport things, many more things than you can over land. Now, yes, you can have caravan trains, wagon trains, and they would probably be doing that. But ultimately, sea travel along the coast is a way of moving from port to port, city to city. And maybe, just maybe, it isn't just seabound ships that they have. Maybe they also dig out canals. Maybe there are river ships. After all, most rivers run into the ocean. So why not make use of it? Of course, rivers are tricky. They are particularly tricky when you have rapids. And with such a supermoon, it might make it a tad trickier. So canals, but canals take time to dig. But let's say that there are some ship canals, and maybe they link cities to the ports, and maybe the coast is reasonably safe, enough to validate the risk. And so for a few centuries, I've been using this system. Well, we would want a boat which does have either some kind of keel or daggerboard, something that is sitting in the water deep enough that it won't capsize. But that's problematic because of the rocks. So what are we going to do instead? Well, what about a catamaran or a trimaran? Rather than just have one hull, you have two or three and you balance it. Different ship design. So let's try catamarans or trimarans. So we've got three separate hulls. And it will be these ships which sit high in the water, but are stable, that coast along the waters. And of course, we have to be careful with this because the trimaran could actually go out into the ocean deeps. It absolutely could. And maybe some of them do. Maybe this is where you hear about the sea monsters and some of them return, but many of them don't because of the terrible mile-high waves. Why not? And maybe, just maybe, when the supermoon comes in on its monthly basis, it takes longer to get from one continent to the other than can be achieved humanly or elvenly or dwarvenly in a month, even with the boilers. Even with the boilers, even with the oars, even with the sails, they can't make it that far. Maybe it takes longer than 3 months. But of course, there is another little invention, and that's the paddle steamer. But those only really work on relatively calm waters. But it might be worth looking into. And I think that for a time, they would experiment with them. And I think that it would be useful for them on the canals. The only problem with a trimaran or a catamaran is that they're wide, which means that the canals would have to be very wide, which leads me to think that maybe, just maybe, two types of ships would develop. You would have the catamaran, the trimaran, for the coastal waters. and you would have something else for the canals. Maybe a narrowboat, or maybe something in the style of a junk. Because junks are sturdy, relatively easy to make. But what about a dhow? Coastal, relatively quick, lateen sail, could sail down a ship canal, could even sail along some of the coast. But perhaps not built in quite the same way as a catamaran. So I think that's something that we're going to look at. Of course, we could also have a longship. Longships are very, very good. Clinker built. They use oars, they have sails. Maybe one of those. And the nice thing about this is that we have more than one continent. So I think that on the non-magical continent, the industrial continent, they would have clinker-built ships. They would be long ships. And I think on the magical continent, the elves would probably build dhows, and the dwarves would build junks. Why? Because a junk is sturdy, but a dhow is graceful. And so, yes, we're playing into elf and dwarf stereotypes here. But why not? This one time, I think we'll play and lean heavily into the stereotypes. And then there are the catamarans. And I rather think that people would get tired of the loss of shipping. And I think this is what's going to drive the development of the airship. Because while the storms are terrible in the air, and while the jet stream is dangerous, I think that, by and large, both continents would independently reach the same conclusion that it is more cost-effective in terms of lives, in terms of resources, to build airships, perhaps rigid frame airships, than it is to have sea ships. And of course, even in an age of airships, you would still be having ships, sea ships, river ships. Some of it would probably turn to recreational uses, like houseboats. But I think that it will be the oceans which truly drive the development of the airship. And I think that some of the storms would be terrible. And again, that would keep the continents relatively separated until humanity and the elves and the dwarves are able to overcome that. And that's where we're going to end off for today. I hope you've enjoyed this. Thank you for joining me. Do feel free to like this video. Feel free to subscribe. Feel free to invite a friend. It does help the channel grow. And if you would like to learn more, get in touch with me. I am an author coach. I have one-to-one. I have a group program. So if you would like to have bespoke, tailored advice, if you'd like me to help you with your novel or novel series, just drop me a line. And I'll see you next time. Bye for now.